How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to another edition of the Couch GMs Podcast, where we are live Monday and Thursday, getting you ready for the Monday night games or the Thursday night games, reacting to what happened last week. I am joined this week once again by our good friend Marcus. How are you doing today, buddy?
I'm doing good, Cody. I don't want to let anyone steal what I'm about to say, though. So I'm being secretive this week.
Yes, I appreciate that. If you're watching us on YouTube, you saw he just covered his face because he got the headset. He's looking like a head coach on the sideline. Marcus is looking great. Happy to have him again. George will be back on Thursday. He's out on his honeymoon celebrating a marriage. I mean, give him a shout out, give him a congrats, but he should be on the podcast with you guys. I mean, why should he be on his honeymoon? I think he should be right back into it. But make sure you're following us on social media at the Couch GMs, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, all those good spaces. And as always, our DMs are open for your fantasy questions, or you can drop them in the chat as we're going here, and we'll be sure to get to them. But Marcus, why don't we sit back, relax, and chat about week 4? Alrighty, week 4, another interesting week across the NFL landscape, and we have a lot to talk about. We have a long list here, so let's just jump right into it. And we're going to talk about the Cincinnati Bengals off the top. They get their first win. Jamar Chase has a big day. Joe Burrow has a big day. But I know me and you at least have been on the bandwagon about Chase Brown, over 20 points in half-point PPR fantasy. Is this something that can be long-term, or do you think that's more of just playing the Carolina Panthers?
If I'm talking from the heart, I'm hoping that that's something long term. I think we can go on record. We've both said all along Chase Brown is absolutely the more explosive running back in Cincinnati. I don't understand the 50-50 split between him and Zach Moss. I understand maybe using Zach Moss as a hammer, but actually he had a couple of shots at the goal line and just didn't look elusive enough to get it done. Chase Brown finally chances. It should be a done deal at this point. We just don't see that happen all too often in the NFL. I think it's going to get there. If you have space and you can pick them up and stash them, do it. I just don't know that it's already cemented in stone and you're going to see it moving forward against a very susceptible defense in Carolina. And for at least 1 week, the Bengals, avert disaster, because who knows what be going on in Cincinnati right now if they started 0-4.
Yeah, I think it would have been a fire sale, and we're not quite there yet. And I'm with you. If you can add Chase Brown, go out and do that. But bye week start this week. We already have a lot of injuries, some which we're about to talk about a little bit. But bye week starting, those benches are getting harder and harder to keep these guys on the what if, and you might just have to pay up for fab in a couple of weeks. But one guy that has been lights out to start the season, he's on the Washington Commanders, the team that you represent. Jayden Daniels balls out again, another day over 80% completion percentage. They just completely roll over the Arizona Cardinals. Is Jayden Daniels the rookie of the year?
Well, I think right now he's got to be the favorite. The interesting thing, if you ask who his competition is, it's not another quarterback. It's definitely Malik Neighbors out of New York. But God, I hate that I'm about to say this, but it's the reality of it. If you look at what he is doing, this man is not playing like a rookie. If he continues on this track, and he has a lot of work to do yet, I'm not going to say in any way, shape, or form he's a finished product. But if he keeps getting better each week, which is what I'm seeing right now, you might be having to talk about some loftier awards than just rookie of the year. The completion percentage, the ability to find the ball down the field, the dual threat ability, it's a juggernaut offense in Washington. I can't tell you the last time that we talked about it that way. That game was just an absolute blowout. It's the first time since 2015 that Washington had over 30 points in back-to-back games. So yes, you're talking about a lot of fantasy viable players now coming out of Washington. And, the letdown on that side was for Arizona. And Arizona, in my opinion, beat themselves in that game. I don't know what the coaching staff was doing there. Washington cannot stop the pass right now. Extremely susceptible to that. And yet, what ends up happening here? Oh, we're going to run the ball. Washington goes down and scores, comes back out. We're going to run the ball. James Conner had an incredible day for fantasy, but in terms of an actual game plan to win a football game and what could have been with Kyler Murray, and also who we all thought was going to be the hands down rookie of the year and who we call kind of anointed with Marvin Harrison Jr. It was okay for Marvin Harrison. He got the touchdown, but Kyler Murray left a lot on the table. And, at the end of the day, it was a blowout.
Yeah, I thought it was gonna be a better game. I thought the Cardinals were gonna be a better team so far than they showed in this first quarter of the season. They still have time to turn around. It is still early, but I love what I'm seeing out of Washington, and I think it's also interesting too. Like when they hired Cliff Kingsbury, everyone was like, "Why are they hiring Cliff? Like Cliff should have stayed in college. He's proven he's not a good head coach." And I think now he's going to be at the top of a list coming in this season for potentially a go around as a potential head coach after what he's been able to do with Jayden Daniels. I do think he does benefit from Jayden Daniels being an older prospect that has had a lot of experience than being someone he had to completely groom from the ground up. But he has looked really well. What have been your thoughts on Cliff Kingsbury?
Well, I think you're right. Daniels is definitely a student of the game and is bringing to the table more than just raw athletic ability. There's a knowledge there. There's a kind of a nuance that he already has. He studies game film. But for Cliff Kingsbury, I think something that might not be said very often is he took his time after he was let go from Arizona. He took time to research other methodologies, other coaching techniques. And I think one of the biggest assets Washington has is him bringing over Anthony Lynn, the former coach of the Los Angeles Chargers, to kind of head the run game. And when he was in Arizona, it was that air raid offense, wide open. You kind of didn't see the direction to the run game and the balance. And Washington has it right now. As a matter of fact, you have to argue the running backs in Washington have been really the staple of, that offense and how they're really making it go.
No, I think that's a great point, and it always goes to one time the head coach, the offensive play caller, they get all the credit, but a lot of times it's the staff that they built that turns into success, and that's a good pull on Cliff Kingsbury. Another guy I want to talk about is a guy that we kind of wrote off a little bit last week. We were thinking maybe there's some different options. DeAndre Swift bounced back in a big way for Chicago this past week, and there was some reports that some of the veterans like Mercedes Lewis, along with Caleb Williams, went to offensive coordinator Shane Waldron and had some concerns about the offense. And I don't know if that was a 1 week thing, if that'll translate to success. Was it just playing the Rams and how depleted they are, and they were coming off of their big win against the 49ers? All that can play a factor into it. But DeAndre Swift looked a heck of a lot better. That Bears offense looked a lot better. What were your takeaways out of that Chicago game?
Well, all of the above. I think everything you said there has played a factor into the results of this week. One, yes, you played the Rams. The Rams defense right now is extremely porous. But the other thing that came into play, and whether it was the result of, veteran leadership talking to the coaches, Khalil Herbert was really kind of removed from this equation. You had Rashawn Johnson and you had DeAndre Swift basically manning the backfield. I think it goes a long way. When you go from 3 to 2, and that carry share, that workload share can be split a little bit more evenly. We all know DeAndre Swift can be extremely dynamic. I don't believe DeAndre Swift can be an every down back workhorse. So if the coaching staff continues to use him like they did this past weekend against the Rams, yes, DeAndre Swift could become viable again. However, I'm not going to sit there dumbfounded and surprised if all of a sudden they revert back and they get Herbert involved again, or all of a sudden start using him in a capacity that's really not fit for him. And slamming the ball between the tackles is not an area where DeAndre Swift is going to produce for you. You need to be creative in getting him the ball in space.
That's a great point. This was also just a fun fact. I have DeAndre Swift, and I believe the league. First 3 weeks, I played him in my lineup. I said, I'm not going to do this anymore. Week 4, he goes back He goes to my bench, goes off. Week 5, I'll consider putting him in there. I'll talk about that on Thursday's show. And if he's back in my lineup and he doesn't do well, then I guess I'm the problem, and I'll just have to keep him out of my lineup for all the listeners out there, because that's how fantasy works. We control so much in
Of
this
course we
space
do.
and how the games play out. That's why we're all couch GMs everywhere. But another game, we're going to stay in the NFC North. Let's talk about the 3-0, now 4-0 Minnesota Vikings went into Lambeau Field and beat the Green Bay Packers in Jordan Love's return. So, of course, now you're going to see the fun facts. Malik Willis is 2-0. Jordan Love is 0-2. QB wins aren't true stats, but people love to talk about it, and it is just a fun storyline to go about. Jordan Love definitely looked rusty in his return, especially to start. Had to regain that confidence to throw with that knee. They made it a game. They were down 28-0, came back to an onside kick, lost by 2 points, missed 2 field goals. It was a sloppy game all around. But one big thing to note in that game was Christian Watson got hurt. Now, it looks like he's going to be a high ankle sprain. It got rolled up on. So it's not the hamstrings that it's been in the past. It was just an unfortunate placing of his ankle. He will be back at some time, but we're starting to see, that limits their 4 to 3. And similar to how you just talked about with Khalil Herbert getting a little bit of less of the work, and that caused, the uptick for DeAndre Swift. I think we might see that with the Green Bay Packers wide receivers moving forward, at least over these next couple of weeks, with Romeo Doubs, Jayden Reed, and Devontae Wicks being more of the centerpieces of that receiving core.
Yeah, that game was really interesting, as I was expecting it to be what it ended up at the end. A little bit more of a shootout, a little bit more high drama. And it really seemed that the Vikings just took control in the beginning of the game and really then fell apart. You have to give LaFleur some credit for making some incredible adjustments. And like you said, it was obvious that Love did start to trust the knee a little bit more, got a little bit more comfortable. It's really interesting though. And I didn't want to bring it up. I know you're a Green Bay fan. I already saw a Green Bay fan group on Facebook today put a post up about bring back Malik Willis. And
yeah, I've seen those. Trust me.
I just look. Yes, they managed to pull off to a 2-0 record. Keep in mind who your 2 losses are. 1, Philadelphia, neutral site, down in Brazil. 1, I still think that is horribly unfair to start a season in another country. And I said it to a bunch of people earlier in the year before the season started, but shame on the NFL for even doing that. 2, you just played the Vikings, who are now sitting 4-0. They have an incredible revamped defense. I'm not panicking at all if I'm Green Bay.
I'm not either.
Yeah, Love's coming back. Yes, you took an injury to Watson. I'll be honest, me as an armchair quarterback, as a couch GM, it was only a matter of time to me. My biggest concern is, this is a high ankle sprain, but now when he comes back, if you've ever played through an injury, you've ever had an injury, we all kind of, we baby it a little bit. When you baby it, you start to put strain on other areas of the body. Does that then lead to a groin pull or a hamstring strain? It's worrisome at this point. But yes, I think less is more in this case. Love can absolutely throw the ball around the field. He saw that. He almost brought them back to a win. I expect big numbers and big things from him heading into the weeks ahead.
I'm with you. I think you only see him get stronger. I know there was a lot of people that went to 28-0, wanted him to come out of the game to rest the knee, and I think it was good that he stayed in. They shake off the rust, and I also think it was good that the team bounced back and made it a game. We see so often teams don't respond when they go down by 3-4 scores early, and it just becomes a rout. I mean, look no further than the 70-something game that happened last year against the Dolphins and the Broncos. Once they went up, they just kept the gas on the pedal, and the Broncos basically went home. So you love to see that fight, and I think the Love going forward will be kind of back to what we saw at the end of last season. But another quarterback we should talk about is another guy that we've had injury concerns. It finally happened. Anthony Richardson leaves the game early. Joe Flacco comes in and plays well, helps lead the Colts to a victory over the former undefeated Steelers, gives them their first loss on the season. It sounds like they avoided major injury with Anthony Richardson, but that has to be a concern going forward as the injuries are starting to pile up here. But Michael Pittman came back to life with Joe Flacco. As a fantasy owner, do you kind of want, like, if you have Richardson, you obviously want him back, but if you own the auxiliary pieces, do you want Flacco to stay in there?
I mean, as a fantasy owner, if I was a Colts fan, I'd love if we had a Colts fan that was, following along with the show today to weigh in on this. I almost hope that Anthony Richardson is done for the year. One, it's a hip pointer. I understand that it's not, the end of the season for him. But again, with the skill set that Anthony Richardson has, which he hasn't shown, he has not been that dynamic dual threat quarterback this year. He's barely running the ball at all. He looks honestly really timid, and it looks almost like he took 2 or 3 steps back. You would think last season that he was one of these quarterbacks that got sacked 60, 70 times behind a horrible offensive line. He looks like a deer in headlights. And yes, dramatically different team. You had multiple wide receivers in Indianapolis come back to life under Joe Flacco, a more traditional quarterback. And we saw what he was able to do last year in Cleveland. I think if you're a Colts fan and you want to make the playoffs, one, you're bummed that you don't have your franchise future quarterback, because I think that's what we're starting to see there, or at least there's a lot of growing that needs to happen with Anthony Richardson. But you have a viable option in Joe Flacco to lead your team and win games.
No, and I think that's a very interesting thing to think about too. And you mentioned the playoffs. And, they're in the division with 0-4 Jacksonville Jaguars, the Tennessee Titans, who, depending on how that game goes tonight, could be 0-4 as well. The Texans, although they are 3-1, they went down to the wire with the Bears and the Jaguars this past week. Like, that division feels very winnable. And Anthony Richardson still could be a great quarterback long term. He just has a lot of growing to do. If they want to go in now, you might have to start thinking about Joe Flacco. I mean, we just saw this with Carolina. Andy Dalton is nowhere near the future of that team.
Correct.
Joe Flacco is nowhere near the future of the Indianapolis Colts. But at what point do you start to say, hey, we need to win now? And maybe that's a decision that has to come from outside the head coach. It's like, if you don't win, you're out. And then he makes that kind of thing. But definitely something to monitor moving forward.
Here's the other, question too. Do you ease Anthony Richardson back and let him sit and watch from the sideline and learn from a very savvy Super Bowl winning quarterback in Joe Flacco?
No, that's a great point, because that's something he didn't get last year. Although he was injured, like, it was Gardner Minshew, a solid quarterback, but in all fairness, borderline starter, high level backup is kind of like Gardner Minshew. But Joe Flacco, you've seen it, high level quarterbacks, won a Super Bowl MVP. Let him learn for a couple weeks, learn from behind him. And I think that's part of the reason they brought him, in from the first place. We've seen guys like Josh McCown and stuff be like the third quarterback, almost like coach on the field, so to seek out at practice. So I do like that idea of maybe playing it slow, easing them back in there, because they got to win this week. Let's see how the next couple of weeks play out. Don't rush Richardson back, because he got brought back, some might say, too soon last week, and that's what caused him to, our last season, and that's what caused him to miss the rest of it. So with the injury concern, I'd let him rest as long as he needs to get back, and hopefully the Colts continue to roll on, and those pieces like a Michael Pittman or even a Josh Downs and Jonathan Taylor, who we'll talk about in a little bit, continue to be solid pieces for your fantasy teams, because we need solid pieces, because people are getting injured left and right. And a guy that we thought was going to be a solid place, off to a hot start, Rashee Rice, sounds like he tore his ACL. It has not been officially confirmed yet, but Andy Reid is saying he is out indefinitely on a freak play after Mahomes throws a pick and Mahomes goes to make a tackle and they misses the defender and collides right in with Rice's knee. That is a tough loss, not just for, Rashee Rice and the Chiefs, but this team in general. Now losing Hollywood Brown, Rashee Rice. They have Xavier Worthy, and that's kind of it on the wide receiver option. They brought back Juju, but what is he at this point? There is a lot of concern
It's a
about
tough
that team.
pill to swallow.
Definitely, but this team's still 4-0. So
Yes.
they're going to be making moves. They're going to be going in and doing something. We were talking about this a little bit off the show, but we think that they're going to be, you know, in the trade market, maybe not this week, maybe not next week, but as that deadline gets closer, they're going to be looking out for a wide receiver. So is there any names that we talked about that you think might make a lot of sense for Kansas City?
Well, there's a couple of things there. You talk about the trade market, maybe not this week. I've often wondered with that, if you make the decision that you're going to go out and trade for a wide receiver, why do these teams constantly wait till closer to the trade deadline? Go make the move now. If you have a team who's willing to deal with you, go make the move now. Teams that you possibly could be going after or be viable partners. It's interesting because usually you're only a trade partner if you're out of it. And let's face it, at this point, teams aren't necessarily out of it or not guaranteed to be out of it. But, that you have to look at teams like maybe the Cleveland Browns. Does Amari Cooper get moved?
I like that one.
That's one that, we talked about. We talked about Christian Kirk. We talked about DeAndre Hopkins. But again, Kirk and Hopkins are both in a division, like we just said, that doesn't seem to have anybody completely running away from it. Here's one that I kind of just popped into my head, and I don't know what the viability would be of this. What about the Cheetah coming back to Kansas City?
Dude, when you said it popped in my head, that was the first thought. I was like, wait a second. You tell me Miami loses tonight. Could they get a rekindling with Tyreek? And I think that would be interesting. And that would come down to solely, do they think Tua's coming back?
Correct. I mean, there's definitely going to have to be some conversations behind the scenes about what the rest of the season is going to be. But if they don't have a quarterback, if they're not going to make a move to go get a veteran quarterback, Tyreek Hill is not going to be happy in the latter stages of his career wasting a season. Is there a possibility to reunite those players? It would be interesting to say the least.
That one would be a lot of fun. That one definitely sounds like something, that would come out of left field. Tyreek has already got the Super Bowl. He's living in Florida with no state income tax. So it might be a little bit harder to steal him away, but I get what you're saying. Like, if you could go out and win, and legacy is important to a lot of these players. If you could come back, and you coming back, although it might not be directly lead to it, but it will be talked about as leading them back to three-peat.
Yep.
Like, that would be something for him. And I think that is definitely one of those trades that's going to happen closer to the trade deadline.
Oh, I agree.
Over the next couple of weeks, if they want to go in now, but yeah, if Miami drops to Tennessee this week, and Tua's not 100% convinced on coming back, I really like that one, and we're definitely going to have to see how that one plays out. But we've been talking a lot about injuries, let down players. We haven't even talked about tight ends. That is just like a desert wasteland. There's injuries left and right. The tight ends, it's been hit or miss on who to start. It has been one of the worst seasons for tight ends. And I've started to hear it. I've started to see it. We saw it a couple years ago. At what point in fantasy do we get rid of the tight end position and just make it a flex?
Ooh, that's an interesting way to look at this, Cody. I wasn't looking at it that way, but that's a really good point. We talk about how bad this season is. I mean, if you pull up all available tight ends and you essentially do not have a single tight end averaging more than 10 points a week, when you have players that were drafted in the top 5 of the position getting you zeros, Mark Andrews with a 0 this week, Kyle Pitts with a 0 this week, you have other premier tight ends getting you 1s, 2s. Yeah, it's literally just throwing a dart and seeing what sticks. So when you're dealing with that, and then on top of it, as we talked about, injuries and players who are big letdowns this year, at least so far. Brandon Ayuk has been non-existent. Nathaniel Hackett, someone needs to put him on a boat, drive him to an island, and leave him there. Garrett Wilson, Breece Hall are not being used. when you have these premier players that we have seen do it, that have had the results, now all of a sudden can't get involved in a game plan to save their life, it really makes it very difficult for you to carry multiple tight ends on your roster. In some cases, to say not even to do it, but the tight ends that we usually would draft and have won can't even get you on the scoreboard. Mark Andrews again with another 0. It's multiple weeks for a guy who was arguably maybe the top 3 tight end. I'll be honest, I drafted him and Isaiah Likely, and I thought I was locked. I thought I'd have the tight end until I think their bye week's week 12, week 14. Latter part of the season, I thought I wouldn't have to worry about picking up a streamer until way into the year, because I figured if Mark Andrews did get hurt again, I have Likely. Now it's the situation where neither of them combined, I think they got 3 targets in the Buffalo game. Now, that might be an anomaly, but it's not like they've done anything else in the other weeks other than week 1 when Likely went off.
Yeah, definitely. And tight end is so, and I've been a big component for like, no, we got to keep it a position for fairness and, make it, because it just weakens the talent pool for everyone else. Cause you have 2 tight ends starting every week, and then it just takes up all the other borderline flex and wide receiver 3 spots, depending on how your league is set up. But after this year, it's starting to become more and more like, let's just play with a flex, wide receiver, tight end, running back. It could be whatever it could be, or maybe just make it wide receiver, tight end, or tight end, running back. If you want to keep wide receivers, like I think there might be a way to look at that makes it more viable for fantasy, just because we've seen so much inconsistency to the point where this past week alone, I was sitting there with no tight end on my lineup because my tight ends keep getting hurt and there was no one worth picking up. And it's like, okay, do I cut a guy like Brock Purdy, or do I cut a guy like Amari Cooper because I have a wide receiver out that's also to pick up a guy that's only going to get me 4 points? Or do I just roll with it and say, hey, no one's scoring anyways, I'm going to leave this spot open because I can't afford the bench spot right now. And I think that sucks for fantasy. You should always try to have, a full lineup. There are certain situations where it might not be possible. You get devastated with the bye Mageddon where you have 7 people on bye. You just can't drop enough people to make it work. But tight end position is going downhill fast.
Correct. And like you said too about the injuries, the best player at tight end, or the best position player at tight end right now, most likely, unless you have some crazy scoring formats, is George Kittle. George Kittle got hurt again. He's dealing with injuries. Taysom Hill looked to be the breakout tight end star this past week. 2 tight ends that he, pilfered, and he got hurt. So it's what was already a very light position just keeps getting weaker. And yeah, I mean, it's to a point where you can't even guess as to who the hot hand might be. You talk about streaming tight ends, for what? For that 1 point. When your best tight ends are getting 1 point, maybe Travis Kelce's back now, but we talk about injuries. If Patrick Mahomes keeps trying to get involved in tackles like that, God knows how long he's going to stay on the field. Somebody needs to pull him aside and have a real strong talking to him. That is not where the Chiefs need him or what they want him doing.
Yeah, and it's hard because you never want to give a guy for trying to go make a play, but at some point or at least push him out of bounds. You're on the sideline, so I definitely get that. And to your point, with it's not even just injuries to the tight end position. Like the other guy that's at the top of the statistical standings in most leagues, if you're half point PPR, is Dallas Goedert. But how long is that going to continue once AJ Brown and Devonta Smith is back? So that's another concern. So maybe I'll go out there and try to trade him. You see a guy with Mark Andrews, you have Dallas Goedert. Don't go for Mark Andrews, go for one of those other players and see if you can make a difference, because there isn't a field tilting, a roster winning, a weekly winning tight end out there at this point in the season.
Not at this point, no.
So if you can turn a tight end or maybe trade a guy on name basis alone, if you're in a league that isn't as strong and your weaker link, so go out there and flaunt those big name guys that might be able to get you some pieces in behind. Don't be dumb. Don't be like, I'll give you Mark Andrews or Tyreek Hill. That's not what I'm saying. But you can make a solid trade offer for a lower end wide receiver that could get you more points on a week-to-week basis. But we've talked a lot of negativity about injuries, a lot of negativity about the tight end positions. Let's do a little bit of a good news, potential bright spot with Nick Chubb. His injury looked devastating last year. To be honest, the fact that he's practicing after week 4 kind of blows my mind. I did not expect him back this early, but Nick Chubb will be back practicing. His window is open, so he'll have 3 weeks to return to the active roster. So probably not this week, probably not even the week after. It'll probably be those full 3 weeks, but at least he's back practicing and getting work back up to speed.
I'm gonna be the Debbie Downer here.
I knew you would be.
I'm real hesitant to buy into the Nick Chubb stuff. I just, the injuries he's sustained, it's great that his practice window's open. I don't know that it gets to this point. It would not surprise me if they move him to IR from this, or potentially that he just has a complementary role. Keep in mind the type of injury he sustained. We've seen it so often with running backs. He's not, if you're coming into this expecting to get the Nick Chubb of old, I don't believe it's going to happen. Not in this season. I hope he comes back. He's an incredible running back. He was great for the league. He could have been argued was the best running back in the league at the time of the injury. And I hope that he's back at 100% Nick Chubb level, at least by the beginning of next season. I just don't know that you see it this year. You have a very, very banged up Cleveland Browns offensive line. So do you really want him running behind that? There's so many factors to this. Great for him. Like you said, great for him at this point already to be back practicing. I'm just not ready to give a seal of approval that he is going to be the guy to turn your season around if you decide to draft him and stash him. I hope you got forward if that was the case.
Yeah, and I think an also thing to look at too with Nick Chubb is at what point do you just not bring him back to protect him and give him another time to recovery? Maybe you're right in the complimentary role, but the Browns are 1-3. Their next 4 opponents are the Commanders, who are hotter than ever, the Eagles, the Bengals, and Ravens. So in that 3-week window, he's going to have to come back against one of those teams. And they still have the Chargers and the Steelers, Chiefs, Bengals again, Ravens again. Like, it does not look good for Browns fans. They're going to be looking, it looks like they're going to be a lock for a top 10 pick at this point. And at what point do you say, you know what? Nick Chubb, obviously he's getting older. Age is a big thing for running back, but at what point is it just like, you know what? Let's save him. Let's get him 100% healthy and try to go win it next year with a revamped offense around him.
I can't fault that line of thinking. Unfortunately, one, you have the competitive nature of the player wanting to get back. And, unfortunately, these teams, and for the sake of the fans too, they want to see their player come back. I just hope they don't rush him back. I hope he doesn't do more damage or re-injure something.
Yep, I completely agree with you. That kind of wraps up, like the big highlighting points we wanted to cover about week 4. But before we jump into some waivers, is there anything else that stuck out to you that you want to hit on? Or do you want to talk about some guys that might help you in week 5?
I think it's time to move on to week 5. The bye weeks are coming.
Yes, they are. There's 4 teams on bye this week, and I don't have them memorized off the top of my head, but that's what the Thursday show's for. I know the Eagles, the Titans, Chargers, Lions, I think are the 4.
I believe you're correct.
Okay. Ooh, I got that. But so let's talk about some guys you might have to, to replace, when you see the Eagles there, you're going to have to be looking for quarterbacks. If you are a Jalen Hurts owner, the Lions, you're going to have to replace an Amon-Ra St. Brown. But let's start at the quarterback position. 2 names that I think that if one is a should add, the other one I'm still iffy about, but really I'm iffy about both. That is Justin Fields and Sam Darnold. Sam Darnold is currently QB4 on the season, playing better than ever with that offense. They have the playmakers. Another 20-point week this past week. Justin Fields, 30-point week this week. You don't see that a lot from fantasy quarterbacks, but they're still both readily available. What are your thoughts on either of these 2 guys?
I think my question is, why are these 2 quarterbacks available? The fact of the matter is, one of the things that I think becomes detrimental in fantasy football is when we get personally attached to a name or a reputation. And the reality of it is, Justin Fields was your QB1 in most formats this past week. Sam Darnold has been balling out week after week. At this point, these players not only need to be rostered, but really should be starting, especially when you have quarterbacks that are not living up to, what we expected from them. And one of them being, not that he's playing bad, but Patrick Mahomes has been struggling immensely this year. If you look at week after week, it's crazy to say, but the way the game flow is going, the way the game plans are working, and the way the players are playing, Justin Fields and Sam Darnold almost feel like a more logical start than a Patrick Mahomes, than a Jalen Hurts right now with no wide receivers to throw to. Now, I know he kind of salvaged his day, at the end of it, but he really struggled to start the day. So again, don't get caught up in the big name hype. Go out, get these guys, because they may be getting you those wins now. I'm not saying they become your all-season starter, but ride a hot streak while it's hot.
Yeah, and I think one other name you can throw in there too is like based on perception is a guy like Geno Smith. He hasn't played yet this week, so we haven't seen anything, but he gets the Giants next week. That could be a fun streaming matchup compared to like Sam Darnold, who's been playing better, but it gets the Jets, and that's a tough defense. So in terms of a straight streaming option for week 5, I might actually leave more to the Geno Smith side of it. But yeah, I'm with you. Justin Fields, he gets the Cowboys on Sunday Night Football. So that'll be a fun one. And their defense looked better against the Giants, but that's also the Giants. So
the Giants.
That's definitely one to talk
and
about.
And keep in mind, Dallas is now down Micah Parsons and Dexter Lawrence for multiple weeks. So we've all seen you can have an incredible secondary that gets hurt if you can't get home to the quarterback, and vice versa. You can have a subpar secondary, and an incredible pass rush makes them look a lot better.
And the last thing I'll say about Justin Fields too is on this show we talk about a lot, other people talk about it, that running quarterbacks are a cheat code in fantasy football. And this week you started to see Justin Fields use his legs more than he has the first 3 weeks of the season, and they continue to play well. I know they lost, but they were in that game till they came back. He helped lead a comeback in that game. Just didn't quite get it over the hump. So I think Fields is a guy that you should target, and you might even have to spend up for Fab. And I think you're right. The Patrick Mahomes thing is it's a tough pill to swallow, because Patrick Mahomes at any given week can put up numbers, but it's been like 15, 16 weeks going back to last year that he's had over a 20-point performance. Like Patrick Mahomes has been struggling with that one. And that was definitely an eye-opener when I heard that one come across by the fantasy footballers. So
he's an incredible NFL quarterback, but right now he's not proving to be an incredible fantasy quarterback. And that just seems so illogical, but it's the truth.
It 100% is. And part of that is because, he's losing wide receivers left and right. Other teams are losing wide receivers left and right. Some wide receivers are stepping up more than others. So waiver wire additions for wide receiver. Darnell Mooney, he started out strong, like he might be the piece. He's still an iffy one for me. But Dontavian Wicks, I talked about it a little bit with Christian Watson's injury going down. You saw his uptick on snaps, targets throughout that game. Yes, they were down. They were forced to throw. Green Bay's not going to sit back and throw it 54 times. But he also got 2 looks in the red zone and came down with 2 touchdowns. He dropped another touchdown. Dontavian Wicks is a guy that'd be readily available. He's not going to be their number 1 guy. Jayden Reed is still going to be that. And he's going to be basically fighting back and forth Romeo Doubs for who's going to be wide receiver 2 that week. But I think as long as Christian Watson isn't playing, he's a guy that you could pick up and start in a pinch if you need it.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And I think you touched on it earlier when you said 4 going down to 3 has a tremendous benefit, because those 3 wide receivers that you just talked about all have a very unique and specific role in Green Bay. Dontavian Wicks now slides right into the Watson role. And that's that deep field stretching ability. Jayden Reed can do that too, but Jayden Reed is more the dynamic player. You'll see them use him in a bunch of jet sweeps, end arounds. They'll try and work him to make him find that open space and be able to run after the catch. And then, of course, Romeo Doubs may be the most underappreciated wide receiver in the NFL. He is that prototypical move the chains wide receivers. I would never want to add Dobbs in a league that's not, PPR based in some form. I wouldn't tell you to go out there because most weeks that's what you're going to get. A bunch of catches, a bunch of yards. Maybe every now and again he'll have those games where he has 1 or 2 touchdowns, but he's the chain mover. He's going to move you up and down the field. I think it's a great situation for Green Bay to be in. Everyone's like, oh, they have a gluttony, and they even have more depth beyond that. But I think it's a great thing for them because LaFleur is going to throw, not 54 times a game, but this is not going to be a team that ideally wants to ground and pound the ball and slow it down. They want to open it up.
I'm with you. Is there any other wide receivers that you are targeting this week? Or I feel like it's a little bit of a slower week in the wide receiver front.
I think Addison from Minnesota, if he happened to have been dropped, and again, he's not going to be available in every league, but if he did happen to be dropped, if he's out there, go ahead and grab him. Again, a player that might be dropped and picked back up and dropped and picked back up, but he could be on the waiver wire. You have buys coming up. Allen Lazard from the New York Jets. You're seeing that connection there. And then another one to kind of monitor. I don't think you're there yet, but again, came into camp late. We see what the offense is doing in Washington. Pay attention to Noah Brown. I do believe Noah Brown is going to start to basically come out as the firm number 2 in Washington across from Terry McLaurin. And again, I'm not expecting you to have a breakout or a guy that's going to win you a championship, but when you're just trying to get through a bye week and we have some really bad ones that come up, he might be a viable player for you to plug in there.
Yeah, and I think that's one good note too is like we're talking week 5, but if you have a bunch of people in week 6, start picking them up the week early. That's always a big thing. To get ahead of it, you get to spend less fab. You get to, beat the system with your waiver wire. So start to look ahead and prepare for those bye weeks coming up. Before we get into
look ahead.
Yes, 100%. Before we get into running backs and tight ends, I'm doing a bad job of hosting. I've neglected the chat, which I'm so sorry. So I want to get to a couple chats here. First off, going back to when we were talking about the Malik Willis, Jordan Love, my wife had to chime in. She said that was me. She wanted Malik Willis to come in and rest Jordan Love, and we're glad that he didn't. Then the Smitty asked, is Chubb coming back? We talked about that all in just a couple minutes ago. If you did not catch that, but real quick to recap, he is back to practice. They have 3 weeks to activate him to the active roster. So he probably will not be back this week or the next week. There is still potential that he doesn't make it back in general. And if he does come back, it'll most likely be in a, slow roll it out. So honestly, my advice for Nick Chubb is if he's sitting in your IR spot, you can keep him there until he's ready to come back. But I'm also trying to throw him in as a trade sweetener for somebody else to deal with at the end. Hey, Chubb's coming back. I'll give you Chubb and this guy for this guy. Sweeten the pot a little bit. The next question is, in a dynasty PPR rebuild, would you trade Pickens and Mike Evans for Rice? I feel like players coming back from ACL more than not, and he's still young. So I'd love to hear your thoughts. It sounds like you have something to say.
Well, I think we kind of touched on this before, and it really comes down to, one, keep in mind, there's a very strong chance that he's going to miss more than a year. If there is a suspension tagged on to this. Now, again, that's not a death sentence. It's not the end of the year, but the longer you're out of football, it is a little bit more difficult to come back and get back up to speed. You would hope for the best, but you're also giving up 2 very predominant wide receivers. I understand Mike Evans is getting up there in age. But in all honesty, if I'm having to trade Pickens and Mike Evans to get Rashee Rice, that's a no for me. You're giving up way too much to get one player back with a lot of question marks. Now, if there's more to that trade, if there's draft picks involved, we'd love to hear it and we can maybe alter our stance. But in a straight 2-for-1, I'm not doing that deal. I think you have 2 or 3 years to win with Mike Evans still. And Pickens, I think the more the Steelers get comfortable in that offense, Keep in mind, you may not have realized this, but Pickens was literally a handful of plays away from having a massive fantasy day. He fumbled the ball at the 3-yard line. He had another touchdown catch that literally hit his hands and he dropped. He was that close to a 2-touchdown day. So I'm not doing that. Cody, your thoughts?
I'm right there with you. I am not opposed to you say you're in a rebuild. I'm not opposed on moving Mike Evans for a Rashee Rice kind of
There you
ordeal.
go.
But because you say rebuild, I don't think I want to move Pickens, who is in his second year, a young guy, for a guy that's coming off of an injury that's also in his second year. I think Pickens is a young piece you can build around. So maybe take him out, throw someone else in there, or maybe just try Mike Evans for Rice straight up now that Rice is injured, because that person will probably take it, in my opinion, if they have a team that can compete this year and they just lost a Rashee Rice. And if you're truly in a rebuild and you're at the point where you're going in, or heck, maybe try to get Mike Evans for Rice in one of their picks, I think would be a better trade off for
It's really
moving.
how that should go. You should be getting something else back with Rice, because Evans is a very viable piece for him to win this year. So if you're rebuilding, whether it's a draft pick, whether it's a younger wide receiver that maybe not is panned out yet, so there might be hope for him, go that route. But, wish you best of luck, Sober Money.
Perfect. And then I have two more here. Do I start? We're going to talk about the Monday night preview, but I know this game is about to kick off in about 15 minutes because we are going a little bit long because me and Marcus just love to talk football. So do you start Jameson Williams or Jaylen Waddle tonight? For me, I'm starting Jameson.
I have to agree. And like I said, I know we want to talk about this, a little bit later, but as much as any of those Miami players can just pop off for 80 and a touchdown, Jameson Williams is a much safer play.
That still gives you high upside.
Correct. And again, keep in mind, Jameson Williams, I don't know. I look at him as more of a number 2 scoring explosive option, where Jaylen Waddle's 3 for me in Miami. So, I mean, as much as I love the Sun God, he's not that big boom player. So, he's going to grind it out, get you a lot of catches, a lot of receptions. He might score. But for me, with the quarterback situation, I'm going Jameson Williams.
No, I'm right there with you, and hopefully that works out for you, Sleepy Twig. All right, last question. This is going to transition us back into talking about waiver wires. We're going to go to tight end because the Smitty asked if any news on TJ Hawkinson. So, one, if he's available and not in someone's IR league, maybe start to look at that and pick up, because it sounds like he's still a couple weeks away. They have not quite activated him off of the PUP. That doesn't mean that doesn't happen tomorrow. Might be next week. But that offense has shown that they're going to put up points, and he's going to be a valuable option. And he is a tight end that could come in, potentially coming back, and be a solid piece for him. So if you have him available in waivers, I'd go out and get him too early, or earlier rather than later. And just because the tight end landscape is so desolate, like we talked about. But the guy I do like is Zach Ertz, and maybe that's because I've listened to you before talk about Zach Ertz and Cliff Kingsbury offense and how he uses the tight end. So why don't you tell everybody again why Zach Ertz is a good pickup this week?
Well, Zach Ertz, I'm not going to promise you that he's going to be a game-breaking tight end, but he's getting looks every week. He's involved in the game plan every week. And with tight end as bad as it is right now, that's really all we can hope for when we're taking a shot in the dark on some of these tight ends, is knowing that there's going to be an opportunity. He's seeing anywhere from like 4 to 7 targets, but he's also trusted. Washington went for 2 points later on in the game. That was the person that Jayden Daniels threw to. And the unique thing about the play was it wasn't a wide open tight end. Jayden Daniels threw to a spot and trusted that Ertz would make it to that spot, that he would come through the route and he would be there to make the catch. That speaks volumes in terms of a role in an offense. So in literally a wasteland of available players, Zach Ertz is available in most leagues yet. He's probably the best bet you have to go out and pick somebody up right now.
Awesome. I'm with you on that as well. Let's talk some running backs. And let's start with you talked about the run game. Austin Eckler was out with concussion, and Jeremy McNichols, he had a really nice day. Is that someone that might get more opportunities, or is that just solely if Eckler misses another week, you could pick him up, but outside of that, it'll be back to Eckler?
Yeah, I mean, if Eckler misses another week, we showed this past week how the running backs are used in Washington. McNichols would be a absolute priority add if you need to stream a running back, but he's just that. He's a streaming option. Once Eckler comes back, again, we mentioned the name Anthony Lynn before. One of the big reasons why they went out and got Austin Eckler was because Anthony Lynn coached him when he was on the Chargers. That is 100% Austin Eckler's role. And he will take that back once he's cleared concussion protocol.
Awesome. And then so some other names to look at. Trey Sermon, Jonathan Taylor got banged up, a little bit of an ankle sprain. It sounds like it's a mild ankle sprain, so he's not expected to miss too much time, maybe a week, maybe two. But Trey Sermon is technically RB2 there, and would be in line to get some more workload. So if you have Jonathan Taylor, you might want to grab that guy just in case he can't go this week. Alexander Madison has been playing better than Zamir White to start the season, and Antonio Pierce said he deserves more reps and he'll get them. So if you believe the coach, Alexander Madison would be a guy to go out and target as well. And then Kareem Hunt. It was his first game activated. He started to see more and more work. And honestly, I thought he looked like the best of the running backs out there. Do you agree? And my camera just turned off for some
I was going to say, there's Cody. No, I agree with you. One, we said when Isaiah Pacheco went down that we really didn't know what to expect in Kansas City. Well, the rookie, Mr. Steele, he's fumbling literally his chances away to be that player. He's gotten the opportunities, but now 2 fumbles, costly fumbles, and it was pretty evident that Kareem Hunt in a dynamic offense can be a viable option. So if available, Kareem Hunt probably be my top target. Trey Sermon, again, if you're looking for a fill-in, if you are a JT owner, it would be smart for this week. They play a very weak run defense in the Jacksonville Jaguars. And Alexander Madison absolutely needs to be on your team. If he is available in waivers, has to be there. I think it's becoming very clear. They still say it's a split backfield. He is the more viable option out of the Las Vegas Raiders backfield.
Awesome. I'm in lockstep with you there. And then 2 quick, if you need a streaming defense this week, Seattle gets to play the New York Giants. That would be my favorite pickup of the week. And then if Seattle would be owned, I'd look at Denver versus Las Vegas. They just held the Jets offense to 9 points, although it was a rainy day in MetLife, but the Raiders have struggled, and that is a good Denver defense. So that's another option there as well. But let's preview these Monday night games quick. The first one is we have another doubleheader. The first one is about to kick off in just a couple minutes here. The Tennessee Titans and the Miami Dolphins, over under 37.5. Titans 2.5-point underdogs. We had the question about the JMO versus Jalen Waddle, and I think that brings into question with Tyler Huntley starting. He's been there just over a week now. He does have experience. I mean, former Pro Bowler, which is always fun to think about with Tyler Huntley.
Does it count?
It should be better than what they got out of Skylar Thompson last week. No Jeffrey Simmons for the Titans, I think could be good for Devon Achane. Raheem Mostert is going to miss another week, so he should see a good workload. But is there any of these guys, like if you're looking at this matchup or for the next one, are you at the point where you would consider benching, maybe not a Tyreek, but like a Jalen Waddle for a Tyler Lockett and a JSN?
I mean, if you have better, and that's the subjective thing to this, is you have to look what's better. For Tyler Lockett or JSN, I can't. I don't see how you put on your bench Tyreek, Waddle, or Achane when any of those guys, if they touch the ball, can go 80 yards for a touchdown. I still think Mike McDaniel is capable of scheming up plays that are enough of a challenge to, create these weird opportunities. And we've seen it happen, these little screen passes that they just take off. Huntley's capable of doing that. So, and Lockett and JSN to me just fight each other for targets. I'm not saying, they're a horrible start, but not over the Miami White players.
All righty. I think I agree with you there. You could talk me out of starting Jalen Waddle, but I completely understand why he has just the same amount of explosivity as those other guys too. So I would not blame you for throwing him in there and just hoping. I just think he is such a high variance fantasy player in general. So that's the one guy you could talk me out of. But between Tyler Lockett, JSN, and Jalen Waddle, I think I would still lean Jalen in that regard. Anything else about the Titans-Dolphins matchup? I'd say it'd be a rough game, but they had one of the best Monday night games last year, so maybe we'll get another good one.
It's interesting to see what Huntley does in the Mike McDonald offense. Obviously, he got the nod over the third stringer. Technically, he's the fourth stringer, whatever. But I'm gonna lean to Tennessee on this one. Miami's really banged up defensively. I think you could see some explosive plays tonight to either Calvin Ridley or D-Hop. I'm not going to say it's going to be mistake free, but I do have a decent expectation that it's going to be a fairly entertaining game. And in all honesty, I like the over on this game. I know it's, not necessarily the best quarterback play, but 21 to 17 gets you the over here. So I do expect that. I think we're going to see around 40 points in this game.
Awesome. I love that. Let's talk about the second game of the doubleheader. That is the Seattle Seahawks at the Detroit Lions. The Lions are getting all the love in the prime time to start the season. Over under is 47. Seattle 4-point underdogs here. And I think the big one we talked about, there's not a bunch of injuries. I think Laporta is expected to be back. At least he's not inactive, so that's good.
Yeah, the only key inactive I saw is Brian Branch for Detroit.
So that's actually a good question. So did I just had it pulled up too, and I accidentally closed it out. But Frank Ragnow, I don't think he had that pec injury at center. But
Correct.
I think he's going to give it a go too, which I think is if he can play through it.
Really? Okay. I thought he was ruled out already.
Oh, was he? Maybe I completely
thought.
All right, this is where I'm going to look it up on the fly because I don't want to give out misinformation. But whether he goes or is in, that could play a big factor into the run game. They have a really good offensive line, but he is definitely the heart and soul of that at that center position.
They do, but they do have good depth there, Cody. I mean, obviously it's not Frank Ragnow, but I mean, I don't think you're going to see a massive drop off just because of the way the run game works in Detroit. So I would still be starting Gibbs and Montgomery with complete confidence, expecting the same from them. And honestly, I think this is going to be a get right game for Detroit. Detroit has really come out of the gates here and stumbled quite a bit. They have not looked like that perennial powerhouse team that I think everyone expected them to be. I mean, they were the, preseason pick for a lot of people to potentially go to the Super Bowl. And they, like I said, the best way to put it, stumbled. Sam Laporta has not connected with Goff the way that he was last year. The wins they've gotten have kind of been battles. And I just think that this is going to be a game where that offensive side of Detroit really shows itself.
I like that. And you were correct. Ragnar was ruled out before inactive. He was ruled out after the practice report. So that was my bad, but he is out definitely for sure. He is on the inactive list. So yeah, but I'm with you on the same thing that you can go ahead and start both Gibbs and Montgomery this week. They ride through those two guys. And I think this will be a good game. I think there's a lot to be told in this game. How real is Seattle? Is Detroit going to take a step back after what everyone thought? This should be a fun one. And I kind of wish it was the only game on Monday night, but that is just me and being bitter about the doubleheaders on Monday Night Football. I think that wraps up the preview of that. But before we get out of here, I do have a couple quick questions as the Tennessee Titans and Dolphins game is kicking off. So first one here is from Connor asking, what do you do? How do you feel about Christian Kirk. So Christian Kirk had a really rough start to the season, but he did come out with a big game against Houston, 7 receptions for 61 yards and a touchdown, 19 fantasy points. How are you feeling about Christian Kirk?
Hold, absolutely hold him. If you have the ability to start somebody that's maybe playing a little bit better right now, I'm not getting rid of him. I think this past week was a great example to show what he is capable of doing. And I think you're going to see Jacksonville get back to what they were doing last year. I don't know why they started so slow coming out of the gates, but Christian Kirk, if they are going to right the ship, it's going to be with the involvement of him as their primary target funnel.
Yeah, I'm with you. And we also talked about, like, if the, Jaguars continue down this trend, Kirk could be a guy that could be moved at the trade deadline, maybe
Absolute trade candidate. Yep.
to the Chiefs or something like that too. So he might end up going to a Chiefs or maybe up to Buffalo or a team that could use a more solidified wide receiver. And I think that's another reason to hold. But he's had 2 okay weeks the last 2 weeks. And at least Jacksonville has been down a lot and they're going to be throwing a lot and he should see some opportunity. So I'm with you. Hold him. If you have to start him during bye weeks, I don't think it's the worst start in the world either.
Nope.
And if you could, I will say if you can throw him in as a sweetener to get an upper echelon wide receiver, I wouldn't hate that either. But I'm not trading him just to trade him.
Yeah, no. And don't drop him. Do not
100
drop Christian Kirk.
100%. All right. And then the Smitty is back here with another fun one. So he is in a 12-team full PPR 2 QB Superflex. So one more time for if you're listening at home and not reading on the screen, 12-team full PPR QB Superflex, which means you can start 2 quarterbacks per week. His quarterbacks are Stafford, Purdy, Fields. His wide receivers are London, Jennings, JSN, Evans, and his tight ends are Laporta, Goddard, and Hawkinson. Then he also has Ramondre Stevenson and Carson Steele. He says he needs some running back help. So of these guys, who would you consider moving on from? Any packages that you can see? My mind initially goes to, while you take a look at that, can I package anything with Goddard and Jennings? 2 guys that are playing hot right now that might be able to get me something more consistent down the stretch. I don't know what that would be, what the level of that would be. But you're going to get TJ Hawkinson back. You already have Sam Laporta. So I think Goddard is the most tradable piece there. And then maybe a Jennings, someone's going to ride the high of, it wasn't 40 points, but he started another good week this week. Those would be the 2 guys I might go ahead and trade for a running back. But I think that's also brings up another good point, that we talked a lot about tight ends being a rough position. Running backs aren't much better. You have some guys at the top, like your Derrick Henrys, who had a massive week this week, but even guys like James Cook, he didn't play great. Aaron Jones has been up and down. We talked about Zamir White. Obviously, the double Achilles tendonitis now for Christian McCaffrey has been a wild storm, and you have Jordan Mason, who's looked good. Ramondre Stevenson, another Steele and Stevenson are both fumbling away their opportunities, like you mentioned there too. So running back has been a hard position, and there's not a lot of people with good depth there. Breece Hall, another name that's been disappointing. Bijan is getting a little banged up. So, but if you could move Goddard and Jennings for maybe, I don't know, could you go get a Montgomery with that? I don't know if the guy would do that, but that might be around where you're thinking, a guy that's in a split. If you don't think maybe go ahead and get Ken Walker if you think he's coming back, kind of like, and taking over the job from Charbonnet. Those are some interesting names at the running back position, but I think that's kind of the tier that you should be looking at.
Yeah, I'm in 100% agreement with you, Cody. I'm finding the guy in the league that plays fantasy football but doesn't really watch football. And I'm absolutely going to try and leverage Goddard, who we all know is going to drop off once those wide receivers come back. So take advantage of that hot play right now, or that large role right now. Possibly pair that with a Jennings, especially if they're not paying attention to what's going on. Use that to upgrade. Steele, I understand. I'm going to guess you probably were a Pacheco owner. And maybe that's why you ran out and got Steele. I don't know that he's viable to even keep on. You might want to look at the waiver wire there for other options. Name we didn't talk about in the waiver wire is Hill from Baltimore, who has proven to be a very viable option, especially in PPR leagues. He's very involved in the game plan. It's not just the Derrick Henry show. He's coming in on the 2-minute drill offense. That's absolutely a player who's out there in a lot of leagues and would be a big upgrade from Steele at this point.
Yeah, and I agree. I like the Justice Hill, and Smitty is with you. He said he thinks Steele's job is gone with those 2 fumbles. And then the last thing he did ask, his team also plays defensive starters, and they start Devon Witherspoon or Rashawn Jenkins. Which one are you leaning towards? IDP questions are always tough because none of them are like, big weeks. Like, I'm probably leaning Devon Witherspoon, but it's a true coin flip for me.
Yeah, I'm going to lean with the Witherspoon as well because I think he has the opportunity for the bigger play. But again, with IDPs, I'm always looking for, especially corners, I'm always looking at what the matchup is, who the weaker quarterback is, who's the more turnover prone quarterback, because that's potentially going to give you a bigger bang for the buck. But if I had to pick one of those and just start them, I'm going with Witherspoon.
All righty. And then our last question here is from Marlon. He said, "Hey, man, I'm really sad right now because of the Rice situation. It has left my wide receiver room pretty rough." He says, "I have Jamar Chase, Ayuk, and then there was a G. I don't know if that was a typo with Ayuk or if there's another person that we just didn't get here, but that is definitely a rough one. Hopefully you can find out in the waivers wires. I talked a little bit about Dontavian Wicks as a potential guy that you could go out and get. Darnell Mooney was another interesting name. It's not going to be great. I don't know what the rest of your team looks like. Maybe there's some running backs you could start to move around for. But yeah, is there any other wide receivers? Because that one was a little bit of a light of position.
There's not a whole ton that's out there. We talked about that already. But Marlon, I understand why you're sad right now. But remember, fantasy football is not a week-to-week thing. You're playing for the entire season. So a loss this week, even a loss next week, it doesn't necessarily mean you're out of the playoffs. The goal is to get in the playoffs and have the strongest team possible. One of the interesting things with this season is you're going to have teams that are going to drop players who are currently injured but coming back because of bye weeks. Pay attention to that. So that might end up being gold for you. Somebody might drop a player who's nursing a hamstring right now or might be back in, by week 8. So it might be a little rough go in the beginning, but if you can get them and stash them on your bench, you could be a lot stronger at the end of the season.
I love that advice. And he did update his question, so I'm going to throw it up here. So he has Chase, Ayuk, and Brian Thomas Jr.
Okay.
And he's wondering if he should trade Jamar Chase in a 2-for-1 to get Xavier Worthy and Deontay Johnson.
I'm assuming you start 3, so I would say no. I do expect Ayuk to start to get his legs back under him. I know he's been really disappointing so far. Xavier Worthy, to me, I still don't see him being that, big viable fantasy wide receiver. I think he's going to give you a lot of boom plays in some big weeks, but I think he would disappear. Xavier Worthy, to me, is a cheaper version of Ayuk, so to speak. And Deontay Johnson, it's great. I appreciate that, but he is not Jamar Chase. Jamar Chase can literally win a week for you. I've seen it happen. I've lost championships against the man. He can put up 3 touchdown weeks and make all the difference. So I don't know that I'm making it for that. But, if you feel that your bench or things are too, scarce for you and you feel more comfortable doing that, at least you can see Deontay Johnson Jr. keep in mind, with the Red Rocket, has become a viable wide receiver. The Red Rocket's gone. I can't necessarily say that is going to be the same offensive production that you are currently seeing. And they could go back to Bryce Young, or an injury could happen.
Yeah, I'm with you on that one. I don't think I would move Jamar Chase either. I mean, yes, I know Deontay Johnson with Andy Dalton has had back-to-back 20-point weeks, which is definitely tough and something that's enticing and which probably raises his value to where it's at right now. But I'm not convinced Bryce Young doesn't come back at some point this season either, which I think could be scary as you move down the line. And I might try to, instead of trying to go for the 2-for-1 here, can I maybe offer a 2-for-1 that's an Ayuk, or maybe a 2-for-2 Ayuk and a running back, one of your other, depth pieces for an Xavier Worthy and Deontay Johnson, and keep Chase. I think that's the way I would approach it. I mean, just look this past week alone, Jamar Chase had a big week in fantasy football against the Carolina Panthers, albeit, but probably won a lot of people a week. So for me, I wouldn't do this 2-for-1 because I would rather have Jamar Chase. And he is thrown into the chat right now. He has Saquon Barkley, Josh Jacobs, Joe Mixon, Bucky Irvin, Braylon Allen. It's a 10-man PPR league redraft. So the odds redraft means there's no picks. But yeah, could you throw in, you're definitely stacked at the running back position, but could you do an Ayuk and a Braylon Allen for a Deontay Johnson and an Xavier Worthy? Or maybe not both of those, have to take another lower end wide receiver from that guy. That's the kind of approach I would go for.
I agree.
Moving forward.
Yeah.
So I think you're on the right path of trying to improve your wide receiver position. I just don't know if I'm so easily going to give up on Jamar Chase without getting something that a superstar or something more solid in return.
Yeah. Keep in mind too, you never want to be the guy who is giving up the best player in the deal. It's kind of a rule of thumb I have with trading. So if you're giving up, you have to get a haul. If you're giving up a Jamar Chase, think about what you're trading for there. You're trading a guy who you most likely took in the first round for maybe a 10th and a last round draft pick. And I understand that the value changes throughout the year, but it's not like Jamar Chase has dropped off. If that would be a situation where Jamar Chase really hasn't shown that he's back after not practicing and not going through preseason, okay, maybe. But Jamar Chase is showing that he is an elite wide receiver. And I don't want to be the guy getting 2 back for 1, because to me, I have to start both of those players, Deontay Johnson and Xavier Worthy, and they both have to hit in order for me to potentially see the ceiling that Jamar Chase offers.
Yeah, I think that's a great advice. He has thrown a few more questions here in the chat. So would you just do Ayuk for Worthy straight up?
I'd be palatable to that. I mean, if you feel more comfortable doing that, Ayuk has started really slow. Maybe he doesn't bounce back. Maybe there is you heard about the whole short gate, wearing the wrong color shorts to practice, and Ayuk not appreciating being called out for it. So maybe there's some discontent there. I mean, if somebody's willing to do that, I'm more willing to do that, because Ayuk to me is a player that's not at his peak.
Yeah, I think I'd be more willing to. I'd probably still hold on to Ayuk, but I'm right there with you. It's a much more even trade. And I think you also pointed out too that, he has Brian Thomas Jr. He looks very promising. He is a guy that, is only going to get better. And he seems to be, he was part of the reason why Christian Kirk wasn't getting so much work in the beginning. So again, I think you're on the right track, and I definitely think you should be working the trade wires, but I would hold off on moving Jamar Chase at this point. Marcus, we're always going long, so let's go ahead and get out of here. But is there anything else you want to hit on or talk about before we wrap up the show?
Real quick, once again, congratulations, George, and your beautiful wife, Bree. Hope you guys have a great honeymoon wherever you're off to, and enjoying hopefully better weather than we're seeing here in Pennsylvania right now.
Absolutely. It has definitely been rainy and gloomy here in Pennsylvania. Podcast. We are live Mondays and Thursdays at 6:30 to get you ready for the games and talk fantasy football. So come and join us on YouTube, Facebook, drop some comments, make sure you subscribe and like or follow us on social media at Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, X, all those good places. George and I will be back on Thursday, and we'll talk to you then.